In this video, we're going to cover 6 strategies to help you grow a healthy team for your nonprofit. Let's get into it.
We are Ted and Lisa Snyder, and we are nonprofit consultants because we believe that a better world needs healthier nonprofits. Today, we're talking about strategies to grow a healthy team. Now, here's the deal. Most nonprofits that we see run out and they're like, I need more people, and they just start recruiting volunteers. But one thing that happens is they don't get the system set up ahead of time. They haven't really thought through which volunteers they actually need. They haven't actually planned. And so the team doesn't become healthy. It just becomes crowded. And over time, people eventually just kind of fall off and quit. And so it's really important that you know how to grow a healthy team. And so today we're really going to be talking about the 6 things that'll help set you up so that as you go for that volunteer growth, it actually grows into something healthy and good, and something that multiplies and actually helps your organization long term. Now, you've heard it said that healthy things grow, but also cancer grows, and you want to make sure that you're growing a healthy team. That's why we put that extra little piece in there, because what you don't want to have happen is you just go out and collect people. Someone comes in with a bad idea of culture or wants to take the organization in a completely different direction, causing problems, and it metastasizes and becomes a really, really big problem. This helps you get started on the right path, make sure things are growing in a healthy way. So tip number 1, know what roles you are going to need in 12 months from now. Know what roles you'll need 12 months from now. This is a lot to think about. Most of the time, what we see when we're talking to nonprofit leaders is that they need people today. We're like, okay, that's great, but what are you going to actually need 12 months from now? When you're looking at short-term desperation recruiting, you end up picking people who can simply fog a mirror, can't necessarily actually help your organization long-term, might take a lot of time to train, but might not be around long-term to actually give your time a return on investment. When companies hire new employees, typically the company doesn't make their money back for 6 to 9 months. We need to be recognizing that as nonprofit leaders too, that if we are constantly recruiting and having people fall off within 90 days, we've spent a lot of time in training, a lot of investment, but we haven't necessarily hit the point where that person is even helping to ease the load or to carry some of the weight that we as leaders are carrying. And so you need to know what roles you're going to need 12 months from now, so that as you start recruiting, you can start looking for, if I need these roles filled, this is the type of person I need. These are the types of characteristics they have to have. This is the heart for the organization that I want them to have if they're going to be part of the team long term. So yeah, you could just make a list of all the roles that you're going to need. But then tip number 2 is to make sure you break down the idealist roles into average volunteer roles. What we mean by that is some of those roles are going to be like, I need a volunteer who can be here for 60 hours a week and knows how to do data entry and phone calls and how to raise funds. That's a full-time job. That's not necessarily a volunteer role. And so you're going to have to break that down probably into a few different areas, and then on top of that, turn that into a few different volunteers doing the same thing, just to split the weight of the load. So for that, it might be one of your volunteer roles goes from that perfect ideal person to, I need a database team who can help with data entry. Now, the average person can maybe commit 1 to 2 hours a week every other week. And so if I have 10 hours a week, I'm going to need 5 people a week with another 5 that rotate back and forth with probably 1 or 2 alternates. So you're looking at a team of 12 people. Now, that might seem like a lot getting started, but it's going to be a lot easier for you to find 12 people who can devote 2 to 4 hours a month than it is going to be for you to find someone who can devote 10 hours a week from here into eternity. The other huge benefit of this is that if one of those volunteers quit, they're easier to replace. If you only have one person doing all of it and they need to step away because their life changes, you are up a creek without a paddle trying to figure out how to get all this done yourself while also going into massive recruiting mode. So this is going to save you in the future from going through those super pressurized moments where you are just desperate to fill the position. Yeah, it's like in the Justice League. When Superman dies, you're like, oh, we got a really big problem, because that's like a big shoes to fill. You don't want to run into that situation. You want it to be like, if like the Flash goes missing, like they can fill in pretty easy without the Flash. Yep. Now, with this, given that we just said, figure out your roles and then figure out the average roles. So right now you're probably like, okay, well, I thought it was 4 and now apparently it's 30. The next thing you need to do is identify how many volunteer leaders you are going to need for this number of volunteers.
This is so good.
It's so hard to watch nonprofit leaders get this huge team around them and then suddenly realize that they are drowning, trying to maintain all of the personal relationships and answer all of the questions and get everything sorted out. And eventually, there's just not enough space or capacity from that leader to manage that number of connections. And so if you have a team of 30 people, recognizing that each person can probably handle 3 to 5 people on their team that they're directly over. So you're looking at 6-ish leaders, assuming that they're higher capacity leaders. Maybe you can get away with a little bit fewer depending on how many people are on that team. Maybe you only need 5 leaders or 4 leaders. But then on top of those 4 leaders, you're going to need another person who can be investing in them, because chances are this isn't the only team that you are leading.
Right.
So you need to know for yourself how many people you can be directly invested into. And then be looking at those leaders and recognizing how many people they can be directly investing into and figure out how many leaders you're actually going to need for the number of volunteers that your organization needs to be healthy long-term.
Yeah, this is actually something that we pulled right out of our course on the legacy flywheel, because it's so important that we recognize that in the nonprofit space, it's not like the for-profit space where you can have one middle management guy who's in charge of 30 people. It doesn't work like that, because everybody has their own lives that they're doing, and then they're coming in and volunteering, and even the leaders themselves are volunteers. So when you factor that all in, you can't have one person who's overseeing 30 people directly. You do need to have a bit of a hierarchy that can help people to know that they're cared for, getting trained, getting their questions answered, and still knowing that what they're doing matters in the organization.
Now, I will say that if you create the volunteer roles to be small enough that the average person can do them really easily, chances are the leader over those roles can actually handle more people than if that leader is over multiple roles where you're asking 5 or 10 hours a week from people. Simply because the level of care and time and relationship building drastically goes up. It follows the same curve. So those numbers might be a little bit different, but it's better to assume that you need too many leaders than to recruit too few leaders. And so as you're getting started, you can start bringing in volunteers, identifying who the leaders could be in the future, and then bring them up as you are building out those teams.
That's really good. And tip number 4 is start recording the activities you're going to be handing off right now.
Yeah. Please. You can keep talking.
So as you're like, okay, this is one thing that I know we're going to be handing off to a volunteer team in the future. Let's say it's data entry or something, right?
Yep.
So I know I'm going to be handing this off in the future. As you're doing it for the next couple months, like take a tally of how to do it. Basically kind of write out step-by-step instructions as you go. Okay, you log in here. Here's the password that you need. This is what you do. This is how you type this in. This is where you put the paper when you're done with it. Like all of that stuff. So that way, when you do bring on the people, you already have your training set up. You don't have to only teach by oral tradition. You know, you can say like, here's a sheet. This is the how-to. Let's run through it a couple times. And then you've got this cheat sheet. And then after that, if you got any questions, we can talk. That's going to make your training go way faster. And you're setting up your training regimen as you do the stuff that you just have to do anyway. Yeah,
this does take a little bit more time as you're doing it because you have to stop and actually write stuff down. But the amount of time it'll save you in training later is huge.
Exponential.
Exponential. And then when you go to actually train people and they're using, it's essentially an employee handbook or a training manual. As they're able to go through, if they're like, okay, this isn't in here, I'm not sure how to do this, and they come to you with a question, have them figure it out or teach them how to do it, and then have them add it into the manual. This way, if they ever need to leave the organization or if they step up into a leadership role, now they're bringing in people underneath them, it makes it easier and easier and easier to change every step of the way. This is something that needs to be a living document where it needs to be updated on a consistent basis as systems and processes change. But the more that you can do this right off the bat, the more it'll save you later on. Because think about it. You can either train 10 people one at a time how to do everything in person, or you can give 10 people 10 books and just answer the questions that they might have along the way. One of them is going to save you a ton of time, and it's worth the effort right now, especially if you know by the end of the year, I want to have handed off this task. As you write it down, you're going to realize this task isn't as hard as I think it is. And I bet there are a lot more people that can do it than I give credit for. So it'll actually help you with your volunteer growth too.
Which leads perfectly into strategy number 5, which is plan to create margin in your schedule for questions and training. When you bring on new volunteers, you have to have time set aside in your mind. They're not going to be able to lighten your load for a while still. We talked about this a little bit before, how businesses that hire people, there's a period of time where they actually take more investment than they're able to have output. And it's the same thing with volunteers, whether they're coming in for something pretty easy, pretty quick, or it's something that takes a little bit more skill and training and learning. You're going to need to plan ahead and know, okay, when we kick off this team, I need to make sure that I have the margin to be able to work with them.
Yeah. And part of that margin is having the margin to plan to work with them in a way that shows them that you're not annoyed that they're there. And that you care for them.
I laugh because I've made that mistake where it's like I got in volunteers and I was so busy trying to do the other stuff and thinking that they could just like lighten my load right away that I'm sure I came and answered their questions really quickly, brazenly, just like didn't pay much attention to them and then like left. And they're probably like, oh, he's not really even happy I'm here.
And then volunteers start to feel bad about showing up. They start feeling bad about interrupting you so they can't get their tasks done. It spirals really badly. So and this actually works out really well. As you're recording stuff, you're already taking time to do that. So keep that in your schedule as open time where it's like, this is intentional, like margin for questions and for training. And I'm going to try and keep these hours open because I know that as I get more people in here, I'm going to need it. So often I see leaders who are running at 100%. Well, usually it's like 150%, but they're running at like 100%. They get a few volunteers in. Suddenly their load drops theoretically to 90%, except that the volunteers aren't fully trained in yet. And this leader, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to use that 10% of time to go train, they say, I have 10% more time for more tasks. And then they can't figure out why nothing is getting better and things just keep feeling like there's more and more and more. You have to plan time for margin for questions and training. And then tip number 6, plan to fill in your future free time with leadership activities. As you're handing off the tasks, your goal shouldn't be to take on more tasks. As you're handing off the tasks and you're bringing in volunteers and volunteer leaders underneath you in your organization, your thought process and your mental activity needs to switch over from doing to how can I be more effectively leading? And if you can't make this change, eventually people under you are going to feel like they just don't have a leader. And that's going to be a problem for retention long term. Yeah,
leadership activities are things like knowing how to cast a great vision, knowing how to direct people in a way that makes them feel cared for and excited to be there and inspired to be there rather than just that they're filling a spot on a schedule.
Yeah.
Leadership activities are things like growing the team, going out and getting more funding. That's the kind of stuff that you're going to need to focus on as you take away some of these tasks that you're getting volunteers and a team to be able to handle. You're going to need to think higher level. Now, avoid this mistake, which is just fill that time with meetings. Don't fill it with meetings. Meetings are usually a bad idea to add meetings to your schedules. Your leadership activities should be relatively meetingless, not meaningless, meetingless. But also, as you're planning for leadership activities, you might be possibly wandering into areas of making some really big mistakes. Because as leaders, sometimes it's trial and error. Well, we have found that there are 3 really big mistakes that a lot of nonprofit leaders accidentally end up making. And we have a video that's going to talk a little bit about how to avoid those 3 big mistakes. It's showing up here on the screen right now. And we'll see you guys in the next video.